Welcome, everyone. Today, we welcome back Svali. You may know Svali from her incredible book, Breaking Free of Cult Programming, and her blog, Svali Speaks. Svali was able to break free from the cult group where she was being used as a programmer and an oracle. And through her own healing journey over many years, she has created some amazing resources that detail the techniques, the rituals, and the procedures used during mind control programming. Her articles are so valuable, both for people beginning to learn about this evil that's been hidden from sight for so long, as well as for survivors who are healing from ritual abuse and mind control. I'll add the link for Svali's website in the video notes. We were actually discussing what would be a great topic to focus on, and Svali suggested child sex trafficking. And I feel this is such an important area to unpack. We know that the funds generated by the horrific practice of selling children is such a huge dollar earner for the cults. And while recent movies suggest trafficking occurs in very faraway places and third world countries, the truth is this modern day slavery is happening all around us in first world countries, in the US, in Europe, and right here in Australia as well. Svali has a book about the Vatican that is free and part of her blog on her website. And here she reveals how Amsterdam is actually the worldwide centre for infant and child sex trafficking. And while the city is known for its red light district, its relaxed stance on brothels, its sexual deviancy, and its free-flowing drugs, it's another whole level to see under those red lights. It's not even just underage women, which is bad enough, that are being sold on the streets. It is actually our very youngest and our most vulnerable. So welcome, Svali, and thank you for suggesting such an important topic. I actually, until I read your blog, I had no idea that Amsterdam was the centerpiece, or it was the sin city for pedophiles. So that was a real surprise to me. And I would love for you to share, what that setup in Amsterdam looks like and how it functions as a huge black market money spinner for these occultic networks.
Gabby, thank you. And thank you for having me again to talk about this topic. This is a very difficult topic to talk about in some ways. So if I hesitate, it's because I'm trying to calm myself down emotionally. I have a lot of feelings surrounding this one, but that's why I felt it was so important to share about it too.
Take your time. Absolutely.
And I also, this is based on my memories when I was in the group, in the order, I know that it's been at least 16 years since I've not had any real contact. So things may have changed since then. So what I'm describing is based on my memories, how things were, at least up until maybe 2006, give or take. Okay.
Sure.
I don't think things probably have changed that much in the since then.
Amsterdam was a real surprise to me, actually. Like I kind of was picturing maybe Ukraine or even China as being like a headquarters. And to just think, a city like Amsterdam in Europe, which, I mean, it's very out there in its own way, isn't it? With like, the sex trade, the brothels and the drugs. But I just wouldn't have pictured that as being their headquarters. It's such a compact little city as well.
I
So
know.
you're surprised. So yeah, I'd love to just hear, how do they hide this kind of operation in such a busy tourist area? Like it's packed in there.
Okay. Amsterdam is what at least for the order I was in, was the financial center the um of the trafficking industry with infants and children. And one of the reasons is because it does have a very liberal laws. And what I recall is that I did spend part of my childhood there with someone that I called Uncle Lou and Aunt Mary. Okay, just those are pseudonyms, but actually, and what happens is they were brokers in the industry.
Wow.
Because in the trafficking industry, you have people known as brokers, and what they do is they're responsible for purchasing and having transported infants and children into different places. So what I recall is that like this is the head area where a lot of brokers in the industry congregate in Amsterdam. And even I remember going, there are coffee houses in Amsterdam, and there's certain ones that were not generally used much publicly. They were kind of private coffee houses where the brokers would get together and discuss the sheets, like the current prices for infants, children, and things like that. As a child, going, Uncle Lou said he wanted me to learn everything about the trade. And so what I had to do is I had to go in a van with several people and we actually went through parts of Eastern Europe, including Ukraine and countries in that area. And we would do various trips, or other trips we would go to Asia. And they would visit orphanages, and they were dressed very nicely. And the people and had business suits, and they would talk to the heads of orphanages and say that they could find good homes for the children. And then what they would do is they would also give a huge donation to the orphanage, and then they would go through and select the children they wanted. And these were often overcrowded, understaffed orphanages.
Yeah.
With very little funds. And so so they would go place to place, like they might take one or two children from one, two or three from another until the van was full. And what I recall is that there was also a couple of older ladies whose job was to take care of the infants in the back of it was like a transport cargo truck van, it was big. And what they would do is they would take care of these infants as we were transporting. They would give them bottles, change their diapers. And these were women who were sworn to secrecy on pain of their entire families being wiped out if they ever shared any information. So they were under strictest secrecy too. And then I remember helping to give some of the babies bottles and changing them. When we were going through areas that were considered sensitive or where there could be a lot of checkpoints, sometimes they would give the baby something to mildly sedate them so they wouldn't cry while we were going through them. But most of the checkpoints had already been bribed and they were just waved through, And it wasn't just infants and children, though. Sometimes it was young teenage girls too. And then when we get back to the city, there was a warehouse where we would go to. And it would look like a company warehouse. And they would unload. There's an area with a lot of security, and it looks like it would be like for a corporation with high security. So no one would suspect that they were actually bringing human beings into their warehouse. And of course, they had, security guards everywhere as well. And they would just unload these infants and children. And then what they would do is while they were there, then the brokers would come, and the brokers would represent various brothels around Europe. And the brokers would come, and then they would put bids in, and they start bidding on infants and children and young teens and when they put in their bids, because this is so hard to talk about. Okay, when they put in their bids,
time. It's such a dark topic, isn't it?
Horrifying.
Just to recognize the suffering, that's caused.
Oh my gosh! Well, they treat them like a commodity. They have checklists, and they'd say, "I need 3 females. I need at least this many blondes. I need 4 boys, and And by the way, there are as many boys trafficked as girls. I don't know where people get the idea that's women and.
So you found
there were just as many
boys. Yeah.
Oh yeah. And so they say, like, I need one broker might say, well, I have an order for 10 boys. I want, 3 Caucasians, 2 Asians, 1, this many, with dark skin, and they would name the nationalities or ethnicities they were looking for, or what their clients were looking for.
Yeah.
And they would just select them from the children. Of course, they had put in their orders ahead of time, so that's what the people in the van were looking for, and then they would just take them. And then they would take them to various brothels, like one of the brokers bought for a chain of brothels that was located, say, in France, throughout France, and another for UK. So different brokers from different countries would come and buy there and then get the children. And sometimes they would transport them from the last checkpoint directly to a warehouse closer to the country of origin, but sometimes they would just come directly to the warehouse and look over what they called the goods. I know it sounds so demeaning, but that's what they call them. They'd say, we want to look over the goods today. But the first selection went to the auction houses. There's special auction houses, such as in outside of Paris, France. Outside Paris, France, there's a very infamous auction house.
Wow.
And they'll take infants and children and young teens, as well as children that have been genetically bred too. Sometimes they'll bring in children that have been genetically bred specifically with certain characteristics I won't go into here. But and so then what the very wealthy would do is they'll sit there and they'll have a dinner, say the dinner will start at 6 p.m. and it'll last a couple hours, wine and dinner, and everyone's in their gowns and their jewels and their tuxedos. And it looks like a high class charity ball, for extremely wealthy organization, but it's not. It's horrendous. And so some of these children would go to the auction house like this, and they're in various countries too. France isn't the only one. It's just the one that I have some of the clearest memories of. And because I had to go to dinner with a first class SOB who insisted that I wear a Dior gown. This is when I was in my teens, and sit next to him while he and his friends would sit, and then they would start the auctioning at around 11:30 p.m. midnight. And they'd start with the teens first. So the teen girls and boys would be up there and they would start bidding. And these wealthy people are bidding on them for their private little parties that they have.
It's just horrendous. Just
Oh
picturing
my gosh, it is.
that lifestyle of, for them it's this event where you get dressed up in
Oh,
expensive
it's
gown,
horrible.
dinner, and these poor children that have been trafficked from
Yeah,
probably already poverty and a bad situation, and
yeah.
now in that horrific environment. And I'm
Oh yeah.
guessing they'd probably be drugged and sedated and all sorts
Oh
to
yeah. Oh yeah. And
cope
and
with that.
then yeah, and then as the night went on, the children got younger and younger and younger until at about 4 a.m. they're bidding on the infants.
That's just
Because
heartbreaking.
sometimes those kinds of people like babies too.
It's just heartbreaking. And
It is.
we hear about, the women and teenage girls that are sold into sex slavery in Amsterdam and Europe. For them, it's months or years, that they'll last in that kind of, horrific environment. And just
Yeah.
thinking, how can these children and these babies, how long do they have after this horrific event? It's sickening, isn't it?
Yeah.
Oh,
Yeah.
I'm so sorry.
And
I'm so
so
sorry to hear your
no,
experience.
it's horrible.
Yeah.
It's and so I this is a painful topic, but people need to know that this happens. And so then they have their little private parties, and then they take those children and they don't survive.
Um, is there
And
at the actual event, Svali, is there any, other than the sale of the children, is there any rituals or any children that are hurt actually at the event, or it's more like a sales event, and then people sort of take the children and
well,
leave them there?
I'll share later about a different type of trafficking, but in the ones that are bought at auction, what they do then is they'll have a little private party with these children, which are considered expendable because they've been purchased, and then what they do is they snuff them. They like people. This is part of their pleasure. Is to I don't mean to be horrible and graphic, but they derive great satisfaction or whatever you call it in doing things like that. And sometimes there is a ritual too. There'll be infant maybe at the ritual, but sometimes it's just for their own pleasure they do that. There's some really sick people out there.
It's just terrific. I often get
And
asked, what do people or what do these kind of groups, look for in a child to traffic or take to this kind of thing. And I think what you just said then about the children being expendable is really important, because there's kind of two groups of children. And I'd like
yes,
you to comment on this as well, Svali, that I witnessed in rituals. And there was the generational children that,
yes,
will be traumatized and, receive horrific abuse, but it wouldn't go to the point of
yeah,
that
exactly.
being snuffed, etc.
Yeah,
And then there's these other children that are brought in from wherever, and this is what's so
yeah.
important that you're
So
talking
yeah,
about today. This
I'm
is where I come
describing
from.
the expendables that are bought at auction, but one of my first memories myself of being trafficked was when I was 3 years old. I had a twin sister,
Oh wow.
and what they would do is they put jeweled leashes on my sister and I, and they brought us into the party. And these are all wealthy people in France and sometimes in Germany, depending. Um, they were in the Illuminati. You would know their names, but I mean, I'm not going to be a name dropper because to me, who cares?
Yeah.
It was so perverted. And sometimes at those kinds of parties with the children that aren't expendable, we had a special temporary tattoo put on us that said, "You can't kill this person." And we would and they knew that their life would be endangered if they killed us. So they always stopped short of that. But they were allowed to do almost anything short of that. And so science, we were put up on a pedestal, and for fun they bid on the who got to have the twins or who got to have the set of triplets or who got, and this is where you'd see your genetically enhanced children who were bred specifically for these parties, like a child with 2 genitalia or 3 breasts or things like that, and there are people that like crap like that,
Wow.
and
It's just
so
such depravity.
yeah. And then, of course, we'd been trained since we were little to perform certain acts and to accept, and to do it. So they knew too what our training was during the bidding. And they said, well, they can do this, this, and this. It's kind of like describing how a dog can jump and bark and jump through a hoop. Well, they would describe the sexual activities that we could do and perform. And then whoever got you for the night, they used us. And sometimes you really thought you might not make it through the night. Like if someone was kind of drunk and laying over you and you're 3 years old and you can barely breathe, that's kind of hard, no matter whether you're wearing the tattoo or not, you're trying to crawl out from under them so you can at least breathe, and you're looking out for your twin, hoping that she's okay too. But what they didn't know is that while we were at these parties, we were also gathering intelligence for the fathers too. They were using us as little spies. And of course, the wealthy people at these parties never suspected that.
No, not with such young children, right?
Yeah, yeah. And people talking from kids, and they'll share
Yeah.
stuff that's going on in their business and their business deals and their politics. And if they're drunk enough, they'll talk a lot, and they think that kids are like a piece of wood that they don't think, which was used, I guess, to the order's advantage.
Wow.
But it was an awful way when you're 3. All you're thinking about is, I hope they see that tattoo on me.
Of course, just the fear, just the
Yeah,
absolute fear.
yeah.
And when you're
So
having
it's another type of trafficking that goes on, and it, goes out throughout childhood, And then I will mention one person. I was in my in my teens, I was a mistress to David Rothschild in France.
Wow.
He loved the auction houses and he knew I had friends who were brokers. So he used I was what, 13, 14. He liked young teens
Mhm.
and young women. By the time I was 21, I was too old to be of much interest to him, except we were quote unquote friends by then, or so he thought. And so, we'd still get together for these dinners.
Wow.
But
You're too old at 21. Like what an inverted lifestyle, really. And how old would he have been at that time? Can I ask?
he was older than I was. He
Yeah.
was quite a bit older than I was at that time.
Yeah.
So, but that whole family is perverse. But anyway, but that's all the side note. I don't mean to go and rant about them. So the brokers keep meticulous records too of their buys and sells, and they share with each. They have called the list, and it would come out weekly with the latest prices on children. And like I said, they would supply the brothels and the auction houses or the private and some of the like the Rothschilds and the Battenbergs and the very wealthy families would have their own private broker. And that's all he would do is go to the warehouses and select children that he knew they would like. They call them the procurateur or the procurers for them. And so they're the family purchasing agent who buys their children.
They've got their own help. I guess that kind of reminds me of like a Jimmy Savile kind of character, someone going around and just scoping different people out. You mentioned a list, Svali, like they're keeping records and there's a list. Was it like they actually had a set price for different
Yes,
pages
yes,
and
for these
everyone traded
children.
at that? It's like a stock
Yes.
exchange. Oh my gosh.
Yes, it's
Oh,
like the stock market is horrendous. The brokers have the list and it's updated weekly. And so the brokers know exactly what the going rate for, say, a blonde, blue-eyed Caucasian boy would be, or an Asian female of 4 years old who's been trained to do certain sexual acts, or um, I don't know, or a Malaysian uh, set of twins
mhm.
that are 2 years old. So they actually have lists that they use as a starting point
Mhm.
for their pricing, and then they of course update it based on what the going rate is. Yes,
Wow.
and it is a huge, huge, huge money maker,
Yeah,
and
absolutely.
that's the sadness of it all too. They make a lot of money. I mean, millions and millions and millions and millions and millions.
Mm. And it's all black ops money, so there's no tax. It just disappears
Yeah.
into these occult groups.
Well, except there was one person that I know that in Amsterdam that the brokers paid a percentage of, they had to pay a percentage of their fees to, and that's the father over Amsterdam.
Wow. So a Jesuit father.
Yes, yes. And
Jeez.
they paid him his tithe. And that's why I was raised by people who were brokers so that I could go then and work for some of the brokerage houses and see if they were being honest and paying their money. That was one of
Wow.
my jobs as a teen, was to
Wow.
help keep the books.
Jeez. What a huge business if they're having to actually put people in to
It
watch.
is a horrendous, sordid, sordid, sordid business.
To give people watching an idea, like would you have, I mean, I know this is like going back like 16 years ago now, but would you have any idea of how many children might be traded in a week and like what sort of prices that they are talking about, just so we can kind of get a perspective of, what sort of, because it's just such a huge money spinner for them, obviously, as well.
Well, a fair-skinned infant at the going rate at that time, like Caucasian-looking infant, would go for close to $100,000.
Wow.
A pair of twins, let's say of Asian descent, um, who maybe were 3 years old and were trained in certain sexual gymnastics might go for 150 to 200,000
Wow. Huge
for the
money.
pair. Yeah, a lot of money for some of them. For a teenage girl of say 13 or 14 going to the brothels, the prices would be lower. It might be 50,000 or 40,000. It depend on how much use they felt they could get for her, how attractive she was, and other factors. Some of the teens, when they got there, they would have a special area where they were taken to, the girls and boys, and then they would sit there and get them addicted to drugs first before they would take them to the brothels. Some of the brothels wanted them to be addicts so that they could control them, and there's less chance that they would break away or try to run away. It's just, I mean, it's incredibly evil, the things they do.
It's so horrific, isn't it?
Yeah.
People in general that aren't, aware of, this underworld of cults and mind control and ritual abuse will just have so much trouble processing how organized this is. And the size and scope of it, Svali, it's just absolutely horrific. I think the perception is, this is like something that one dirty old man gets up to when he's on holidays overseas, and to hear, that there's houses, there's trucks coming in, there's brokers, there's a Jesuit priest demanding teeth.
Yeah.
It's
Well, and they also come into America. Like one route was from Quebec. They would come down through Canada, through Toronto, and then down into New York City. So it's very common in the US too. And that's why, I did see the movie Sound of Freedom. I don't know if you've heard of it.
I
It's a
haven't
movie.
seen it myself. I've had a few survivors and friends watch it, and they sort of, their perception was it was just a very sheltered look at the industry.
Yes.
That makes sense. And I
Yeah,
think we
I was
have
going
to
to say,
expect that, considering who made it and the people involved.
yeah, exactly. But it did show just one tiny slice,
Right.
except it didn't show the extent of it. It didn't show the very, very, very young children, and implied that they were coming from Mexico and South America and through the cartels. And that's
Yeah.
only one slice of the pie. That's a very small section of the trafficking. One way they get gals from into Canada was they would put ads, like nanny wanted or housekeeper or model wanted, and they would get these teenage girls to apply, or come learn English and be paid at the same time, and then they would just disappear.
Wow.
And they would go to brothels. New York was a large center. Phoenix, Arizona, Los Angeles is another. They actually have trafficking routes where vans full of these girls and children are just transported across the US. It's bad. It's really bad. And it's much more extensive than that movie showed, I'll tell you that. But one reason I'm talking about this at all, it's horrendous to hear about, is because people need to become aware of the extent of this. There's a lot of
Definitely
evil going on in this area, and young children who are just being exploited horrifically.
Absolutely. It's so important,
Well,
survivors.
and it's been covered up. No
Yeah.
one's reporting it. No one's investigating it. I went to a trafficking conference here in the US several years ago, and there's a FBI agent talking about the sting operations they were doing. And I'm listening, I'm thinking they're getting one or two pimps off of a street corner. And so I went to him later and I said, what about the large scale international trafficking that's being done, like through these ports of entry? And I mentioned a few, are you doing anything about that? And he just looked at me like I know, like I had a horn in the middle of my forehead or something. He just said, no, no, no. And he acted really nervous and he left. He went to
Wow.
the other side of the room. And I thought, Well, that answers that. Why we're not
Yeah.
hearing more about the real problem, why we're hearing the sanitized version in the media that just tells us little tiny bits here and there.
So true, isn't it? It's always just portrayed as like this one house, a small group of men that were up to this, and it never really
Yeah.
was like the larger network.
And
No, here in
yeah, and
Australia, when we
it
have
is, and that is, by the way, that is a real issue. I
yeah,
mean, I'm not at all downplaying the woman who's been trafficked out of financial need, or because her boyfriend got her into it, or because her gang is doing it. I am not at all dismissing the painful aspects of that, or how horrific that is too. But I'm saying, but that's not the whole picture. And usually when you hear about trafficking, that's all you hear about.
that's right. We're not sort of given the big picture that you're describing now, which is like an international, both targeting and then feeding children through to these destination
Yeah,
points all over the world. And it's so
yeah.
tightly coordinated. Like to have whole trucks, like how many young women and children and babies would be on a truck like the one that you experienced?
Oh, gee. Oh, no, there might be like 3 dozen infants. And then there might be
Wow.
on a trip, and then there might be like 20 older children because they had like little sleeping mats and almost like those like in the army how they have those little fold out cots that are in rows
Yeah.
like on the sides. Well, they had these little beds that would like come down like in rows, almost like in a
Like on
Navy
a
ship,
plane or something. Yeah.
Yeah, and then so they'd have the older children sleeping in those,
Oh my.
and the infants, they would have on a trip like that though, you'd probably have about 6 older caretakers helping to feed the children, keep them quiet, you know, take care of the infants, sedate the children and infants if you're going through a checkpoint where it's kind of, you want them to be silent in case there were people nearby, besides the guards, although they tend to go through it in the middle of the night when no one else is around. But,
Right.
it's all very well organized and plotted out. But you can get a lot of kids in the back of one of those,
That is
just
so
laying
much
down in
more.
their little cot, their little beds.
That's actually so much more than I was expecting you to even say, Svali. That's just huge. And obviously, like you were saying, these checkpoints, must have a deal and be paid off because that truck, if anybody looked in it, there's no excuse for having that amount of children. Like it's not five or six, is it? Like
Yeah, yeah. Well, I mean, it
so
looks like
obvious.
a business truck on the outside, of course. It looks very
Yeah.
legitimate, but yeah, they pay a lot of money,
Wow.
and or even try to have some of their people get jobs at the checkpoints too. And they know if there's someone who is sympathetic to them or who's mind controlled or who's been paid off to wave them through. They really organize it well.
Yeah. And you just think even, that the way they would be looking at that truck's cargo, just the amount of money that they would be able to sell those,
Yeah.
innocent children and young people for. Like they've got plenty of money to grease that truck's way through. It's just horrific.
And if you realize though that they call them cargoes are coming in weekly. They use different routes. They don't use the same routes all the time, and they don't go the same places. They have places all over the world they go to get children from. And I'm talking about Europe, but they do it to other countries, of course. India, Malaysia, China,
Yeah.
Russia, um, and South America too.
I was going to ask you, Svali, because we know with the Jesuits being like the military arm of the Vatican, and
Hmm.
obviously so many children become vulnerable and targeted when the US goes into a country and starts a war. So like when there's Afghanistan or Iraq, there were so many children that went into trafficking networks and went into organ harvesting
Yeah.
and that sort of thing. Did you ever see those kind of children coming into Europe, or that they were potentially sold somewhere closer, I guess as well?
Um, Not so much that way
Yeah.
as like, let's say a country is at civil war. Like, I'm going to say, let's say a fictional country in Africa is at civil war.
Mhm.
Sometimes what these people will do is they will swoop in, with permission, they will come into a village and pay off whatever regime is in charge a huge amount of money to allow them to come in and just scoop children out of the village. It's unbelievable. But there are some countries where that kind of corruption, but that these are the same kind of countries that take children into as child soldiers into their own
That's
army.
right.
Okay, so but there's unbelievable corruption where they say there's this village, and it might be a village of a tribe that's at war with the main government, and they say, can we go into that village and just take their kids and infants? And they'll say, oh yeah, get rid of them. And
Mm.
then they say, yeah, we'll pay you millions to let us do this. And they do.
It's horrific. It's just like there never seems to be a shortage for these people that are searching for vulnerable children and infants. They've got so many places to look, right?
And then sometimes to cover it, they'll just like they'll say that the army came in and committed genocide and destroyed the village. Well,
Wow.
not the whole village.
Yeah. What about the children? What about the infants?
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. Maybe the adults, but not the children. I
I
wish I didn't know about things like this,
know.
Gabby. I really do.
It must be so hard to just go back into these memories again. So thank you for your time and
Yeah,
sharing it with us, because I feel it's so important that we give people a clearer picture of what child trafficking is about, and not the very limited picture that they're being given, which at least people are now aware of it, because of these bigger publications and movies and that sort of thing that is going out. But I think this is a great interview to share with someone that's maybe seen that movie, to give them an actual idea of the extent of it, because until we really
yeah,
understand how big these networks are and how they're operating, really unhindered above our governments, till we realize that, how do we stop it?
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
You mentioned about the Jesuit priest, like overseeing the Amsterdam area. Just in terms of the structure, I would love to ask, were there other occultic groups working under the Jesuits there? Some of the brokers from different occultic groups, for example, that were starting to traffic children
Oh
into
yeah,
the
yeah.
network as well.
No, no, no. A lot. Some of the brokers were somewhat independent brokers.
Yeah.
Some were working for groups, and some, like I said, and then you had the procurators who were work for the private families, the wealthy families. So you would see a mix of that. So you might see various groups. Oh, definitely, you'd see various groups coming in, or their brokers coming in and bidding. For the private parties of the wealthy, it tended to be the procurators would come and get children, and they were always given first choice.
Really?
And then after that, then the brokers for the large brothels or for the large sex clubs. In my memories, what I remember is they're all over Europe. There's private sex clubs where anything goes, including pedophilia and all kinds of nasty things that
Do you say all over
are just.
Europe, Svali?
Oh well, I mean, not yeah. What I mean is in various countries all over Europe. There's
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
yes, I meant no, not in. I don't mean all over everywhere, but I mean in
Oh,
almost
I'm
every
sure it
country
is
Europe.
all over everywhere. It's just
Yeah,
more
yeah.
hidden in some
There are
places than
these.
others, right?
Yeah, there's private sex clubs where anything goes, anything. I'm talking about things like being allowed to go and take a child and put its head in a toilet and flush it, because that's what some people like to do.
It's just sickening.
Yeah, things like that. And animal shows with children. And they have them in the US too, and in Mexico and South America and all, I mean, Russia, so it's not just, China. So lots of countries have them, and these are very private, exclusive, underground sex clubs.
Yeah.
And so the industry, the brokers also supply children for those too.
And I remember reading in your blog, which I found quite interesting and just shocking, really, how in Amsterdam, because I guess because these clubs and where children are offered for sale, and these horrific depravity of sexual activities, people need to find these places, so they have special ways of letting people in the know what's on offer. And you mentioned in your blog how in Amsterdam they would actually, in the red light district, have a woman who was for sale actually cradling an infant very late at night. And I was just like, oh, there's so many tourists that would walk past and not
I have no
understand that, or
idea.
be like, oh, is she babysitting, or was the
Yeah.
baby sick, or like you
Yeah.
think so many things. Like 5 years ago I wouldn't have been like, oh my God, they're selling children. But it's so clear looking at it now. And I know here in
Yeah. I mean, I
Australia,
don't know if they still do
mm,
that. That was back then. I mean,
yeah,
probably since I did my blog, they've stopped.
yeah, it
No.
might be too obvious now.
Uh,
Who knows?
but
Yeah.
yeah, but back then they would do that, and the children of the prostitutes that ran the streets, it was awful. You know what I mean? That was awful too.
So far from home, and they would have been vulnerable children already that have probably had
Yeah.
such hard days, which is
Yeah.
one thing. But to end up within occultic groups, practicing horrific rituals and sexual depravity, that's just
Yeah.
beyond belief, isn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I think I've lifted the lid off of a very ugly, ugly, ugly international problem.
Yeah.
What I do wish is that something could be done. I wish there was a way that these auction houses could be stopped, that the buying and selling could be stopped. I wish there was a way that something could be done.
Yeah.
Um,
I was actually going to ask you, Svali, as well, just from someone that has seen such huge operations. Is there, or what do you see as the solution going forward? Because I know we've all been banging our heads against the wall over the previous years, trying to get things looked at. And like you were talking about how you inquired at a trafficking conference about getting help and no one wanted to. I've done the same. I've approached many different groups. It doesn't get action. Like, when it's a large enough operation, it just doesn't get action.
yeah,
It gets
yeah,
buried under paperwork. It
yep,
people get moved. It just doesn't get done. So it seems that it's just a few lackeys, a few
yeah.
small busts. They throw one under every now and then. But the actual operations
I
continue
think
unhindered. So yeah, I'd love to hear
yeah.
what you think could be a solution.
Well, I don't know about solution,
Yeah,
and I'm going to mention my Christian faith here, but prayer. I believe we need to pray against
I love that.
the demonic that feeds this kind of a system.
Yeah.
I believe that as a Christian that we need to pray for those trapped in it, that they get free, including the brokers, because so many people in the industry from the bottom up are just trapped. That the poor women who are trapped on are blackmailed into taking care of the children um, would get free. We it's going to take a miracle, and we need to pray that God would do that miracle and bring change into some of the human hearts. I think helping to increase awareness that
Yeah.
this is an issue, because right now people are just a lot of people are reeling from the thought that, oh my gosh, you mean children get trafficked, at all?
Yeah.
Even 8-year-olds, they have trouble believing that. So, but we live in a world where denial, people look the other way. They don't want to believe these things happen. But by
Yeah.
maybe educating people, maybe some of the survivors who are now speaking out, I think that we can pray that this gets not only exposed, but that people in the media would be willing to report it. That
Absolutely.
people in the legal system or the justice systems would be willing to do something about it. That we come against any demonic protection over what's happening. That we pray against that demonic and just ask that God take it down and expose this and help people to get free. That He would set the captives free.
Mm.
Yeah.
I love that. I think it's so important to realize that, behind a very physical problem of, children being targeted and then handled and trafficked all over the world for these horrific practices, there is that, that spiritual component of, these dark entities and demonics that are encouraging and basically behind these people's actions. So it's a beautiful way to look at it, Svali, of the power that we can together as a community to pray over these networks to be exposed, to be shut down, for the children to be able to come out, and survivors bravely speaking out, like yourself, Svali, as well. I know today would have been really difficult, talking about the abuse of young children. Those courageous stories are really highlighting this evil, the truth of this evil that we need to know. Like we need to have the entire picture of it, not just a G-rated version of trafficking, for us to be able to solve the problem as well. So thank you so much for, so bravely covering such a traumatic area. And I hope for people watching, you can take action through, taking some time to pray over this, making that a regular part of your day, because, for these children, it is their day and it is their lives. So, I think that's something really beautiful that we can do, is just try and pray over this entire situation to be exposed and shut down, and pass on this interview to people that have some awareness of trafficking, or maybe have seen a movie recently about it, but don't really understand the full depths of it. This is a great time to actually give them some more information, because they know that trafficking exists. At least they just don't really have the full picture. So thank you so much, Svali. Is there anything else that you would like to finish on?
Not really at this point. I think we covered quite a bit, but I do believe prayer does work.
Me too.
And I do believe that I also believe in putting personal action. So if anyone feels led to write their congressman and ask, why isn't this something being done about this, or whoever, anyone who might have connections or be aware of trafficking, just be aware that trafficking has a lot of layers to it, and maybe it's time to start doing something about the youngest and most vulnerable.
That's so true.
The infants, the babies, and the young children.
Yeah. Without us, they don't have a voice. And, by us all understanding the levels of trafficking, at least we're equipped to start being able to see this in our communities as well. And I always say to people that are learning about this, because it's such a dark topic, you can be proactive both through prayer and through educating others, but keep an eye out, like, constantly have your eyes open in the community. Like a couple of girls I know that are aware of trafficking. A few months ago, they were at a pool and they noticed a little girl getting targeted by an older man trying to lure her into the toilet. So they were able to jump in and do something about it. And we don't know where that would have went, but because they're aware of trafficking and they're aware of how these people work, they saw it. So, never think that, something as simple as sharing an interview like this or talking to someone about trafficking, it might help a child. It might, save one from being abused and get them out of that, horror much earlier. So we can all take action in our communities as well. So thank you so much for your time, Svali. It's always such a pleasure having you join us, and thank you for shining your light on such a horrific area that is so prolific in our world. And it's time for us to really push back on that darkness and pray through it so our children can be free. So thank you so much.
Thank you, Gabby.
God bless you.
Oh, bless you too.